Hey Vermont history students. This is the video for Unit 7, and I'm making it on Sunday, and I'll put it up today, and then tomorrow when Unit 7 begins I will be on a hike with a class of 3rd graders. And I'll be back around like 3, and I'll immediately come to the computer and check and see how things are going. So anyway, just so you know, I have something where I need something I need to do tomorrow. I was just looking at the discussion board. I got 4 responses to Unit 5's question and 4 responses to Unit 6 question. They're excellent answers. They're really cool. I wish everyone had written in, all 7 of you who remain. But they were really great, you know. I mean, hopefully there's some sort of give and take and you read other people's responses and think they're interesting. That's the idea. But I was, you know, for the responses I got, I was pleased. There's nothing up yet on the town meeting number 3, and I'm looking forward to people writing in. That's, you know, one of the first things I'll check tomorrow afternoon when I come in. There's nothing yet, but by tomorrow, will you please respond to the town meeting documents? I put up 4. I hope that was okay. It doesn't seem like a lot of extra work, to be honest with you, to me. But I'll go back to 3 if it in any way seems like a hindrance to people. So there you are. I think we're all caught up about, and here we are. We're at the halfway point of the semester already. We're on Unit 7, and it is the turning point in Vermont's history. And this is something historians have known. This is something I've known in the past, that the 1890s are really the crucial decade, although I have a different and more elaborate perspective on it since I've been working on my book project. And the reason why the 1890s are the turning point in Vermont history is because it's the decade when summer tourism kicked in huge. And you can draw a straight line from the time when summer tourism kicks in all the way through Calvin Coolidge and the New Deal and Act 250 and hippies arriving and all the way up to the present, what Vermont's contemporary identity is. Really dates to downhillers needing to begin to grapple with the concept of diminishing returns, as in terms of using tourism as a means to promote growth. Okay, there's a limit, and when downhillers figure that out, they really begin to shape Vermont, hopefully cooperatively with uphillers, in a way that gives us what we have today. So there's 2 sections to this unit. The first one really just intends to get you thinking and appreciating that tourism got huge and what some of the implications and consequences of that was. And then the second unit is about the election of 1902, which is a famous and really controversial and animosity-filled election, which was very unusual for the state at the time, which I'll tell you about in a second. Just, you know, so you have the background, there was something that was founded in 1870 called the Board of Agriculture, a state agency that downhillers dominated, that made every effort it could on behalf of its members to promote modern farming. They farm in modern ways and maximize your profits. Don't do things the way that your grandfather did. Uphillers, of course, generally were indifferent or hostile to the Board of Agriculture because they like doing things the way that their grandfathers had done them. Doing them that way cultivates the kind of communities that they wanted. Alonzo Valentine, when he was appointed Commissioner of Agriculture in 1889, was a separate, totally separate office, and it was quite temporary. It only existed for 2 years. And Valentine got into office, and what he did was, in addition to bringing 65 Swedes to Vermont, he gathered together a list of the first ever comprehensive list of Vermont farms for sale. And also he set up a network of people in small towns who were willing to be contacted on behalf of inquiries about the acquisition of those farms. And the Swede program itself produced an enormous amount of publicity, with the result that people all the way in the West Coast, I mean, Valentine said he received inquiries from the British consulate in India. There was articles about the Swede program in a newspaper in New Zealand. It was really, you know, national news, certainly. And whether or not it just happened by chance, and Valentine's original idea was to simply recruit Swedes, or whether he was a mad genius, and all along it was a gimmick. The Swedes were a gimmick, and what he really wanted to do was promote summer tourism. That was the result. His office was discontinued in 1890, but the Board of Agriculture took his list of farms that he had gotten together, farms for sale, and they packaged it and continued to print it. And in 1891 it was called A List of Vermont Farms, a list of desirable Vermont farms at low prices. And within 6 years it was called Vermont, Its Fertile Fields and Summer Homes, which is kind of a model for you thinking about what had happened in those 6 years, is that summer tourism got huge. It has to do with the whole progressive era and the middle-class instinct to improve the city, but to get away from it and to get back in touch with rural nature. Having a summer home was something only elite, Rockefellers, Vanderbilts did before the 1890s. But Vermont farms are really cheap, and they are within the price of a middle-class family. So where you're off and running, and you end up with, downhillers being really excited, more excited about the state than they had been in a long time. People are saying such nice things about it, and there is the potential for enormous growth. They come up with things like the Vermont Development Association, which is, there's irony in all of this, because of course they were excited about tourism, so they came up with a development association in order to promote tourism so they could have more development, though of course tourism is dependent on Vermont's lack of development. Too much development will make it not attractive to potential tourists. And they come up with things like the Vermonter magazine, founded in 1895, would extol in the same pages how wonderfully entrepreneurial and progressive and growth-oriented Vermont is, and then also talk about the little red schoolhouse on the hill and the old oaken bucket, and come home to your mother, because Vermont's tradition, and Vermont's still rural, and Vermonters haven't been spoiled by the modern age. And of course the Vermonter magazine went out of its way to completely ignore the negative consequences of industrialization, that there was poverty and that there was Catholics and that there, factory labor, child labor. You didn't see that in Vermonter magazine. And so, what's going on is the downhillers were confused. And the thing about downhillers is they're always going to do something. They're not going to sit back and be like, I'm confused, or let's figure out what we should do next. They're going to do stuff. It's an annoying thing about them. But they didn't know what to do, because on the one hand, promoting tourism seemed like the best path to reversing Vermont's decline. On the other hand, it's Vermont's decline that had produced tourism. So they ran the risk of destroying the very thing. How far can you go in promoting tourism as a means of promoting growth? And that was what they had to grapple with. And they did a really pretty lousy job of it at first. But what they did do was interfere in rural life as they hadn't in a long time. They insisted that barns be painted red and handed out free red paint. They asked people to clean up their yards of all their junk. They wanted to improve roads and access to small towns, an enormous array of things that they wanted to do in order to make rural Vermont more accessible to tourists. And the result was that uphillers got angrier and angrier and angrier, and finally, in 1902, it boiled over in this election. Now the thing is, the question is, does summer tourism, is that what Vermont has always been about? Vermont's always been about balance, right? Freedom and unity. Is tourism in that it's about, we want to have growth, but only in a way that complements Vermont's traditional nature, which is what tourists want. Is that balance? Is that really at the heart of what Vermont always was, or is it something very different? You need growth, but not too much, and you need preservation, but not too much. You want to improve rural Vermont, but not ruin it. Is that the founders' vision of balance? Well, in 1902, it all seemed to boil over. The original candidate who was supposed to be governor was William Seward Webb, who owned Shelburne Farms, rich guy, and he was a Vanderbilt money. And you can read his withdrawal statement in the images folder for Unit 7, because what happened was that tons of people uphillers were really angry because they said he's not a real Vermonter. He was a New Yorker who only lived here in the summer. And the guy who replaced him as the front runner was a guy whose name was McCullough, John McCullough, who was a lawyer born in Delaware who was married to the daughter of a rich guy from Bennington, and he'd moved to Bennington. And people said, he's not a real Vermonter. He wasn't born here, he's rich, all that. So then a third candidate came in, and that was Fletcher Proctor, who was the son of Redfield Proctor, a United States senator, who owned the Vermont Marble Company. And he was born in Vermont. But of course he was rich just like Webb and McCullough, and people said he wasn't a real Vermonter. He'd gone to Dartmouth and all that. And so in the end it came down, it seemed like McCullough was going to win the election, and all people, uphillers, grumbled about how they were unsatisfied with him. And you can look up the Mountain Rule, in which the Republican Party balanced every other year governorships between the East and West, and all the other things that the leaders of the Republican Party did to create real sort of unanimity and consensus and smooth going. 1902 it all fell apart, especially because a guy named Percival Clement, who owned the Rutland Herald, jumped into the race and ran on a platform of ending prohibition of alcohol. Now, briefly, in 1853, downhillers pushed through prohibition of drinking alcohol because there was that Jacksonian temperance spirit, and they wanted uphillers and Catholics not to drink, so they show up to work on time. And uphillers wanted to keep drinking, keep alcohol legal. 50 years later, in 1902, it was reversed. Uphillers had reached a temperance consensus. Not drinking was like this most visible barrier between who was good and who wasn't in small towns. Whereas downhillers now, many of them wanted to have the sale of alcohol because it meant that it would promote tourism. Tourists could come and sit at hotels and drink Chardonnay on verandas. And also, it would help promote the immigration of Catholics, for whom, of course, alcohol is a sacrament. And without a working class, without Vermont being an attractive place for working class people to move, you can't have factories. And again, there's your dilemma, the balance thing. Downhillers wanted more factories and they wanted more tourists and hotels. They wanted scenic Vermont, but they wanted industrial Vermont at the same time. I mean, at that point, uphillers freaked. Actually, there was a prohibition party that started too, and that was for a lot of uphillers. But it got to the point where people in 1902 couldn't talk about the election without getting red in the face. This was constantly commented on. It was like a tornado hit the state. And this guy's not a real Vermonter, that guy's not a real Vermonter, and I'm angry, and it was great. And what I want you to think about, right, is first of all, is that a good thing that people argued so much? Is that progress towards balancing freedom and unity when uphillers and downhillers are at each other's throats and hate each other's guts and there's so much discussion, or is that a real step back? Do you have to wait until all that arguing is over before then they could begin to again make progress towards balancing freedom and unity, balancing the past and the future, balancing preservation and development, balancing progress and tradition? That's what Vermont's about. And summer tourism obviously reshapes, but also brings into clearer focus the very balanced nature of Vermont's experiment in human living. Is it a good thing they were arguing so much in 1902? Second thing is the question that I have up there for Unit 7, which is downhillers now, because of tourism, are going to interfere in uphill life, right? They're going to sell uphill life. Does that mean they have a lot more respect for uphill life than they had in the 1870s and 80s when they always said uphillers were in decline and all that? Now they're beautiful and pastoral. They're for sale. Their way of life is for sale. Does that mean that they're going to back off and respect the integrity of uphill life, do you think? Or do you think even more than before tourism got huge, they're going to interfere and try to ruin uphill life? And I'm very interested in what you have to say about that, and I'm looking forward to your responses by Wednesday morning. And please do respond to the town meeting documents tomorrow, if you would, or today. Thanks. Bye.